So we're up to Daf Ayin Vav, but before that, we have to go back to the Mishnah and review the last part of the Mishnah, Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph, and then segue into the Gemara on Daf Ayin Vav. The Mishnah, towards the end of the Mishnah, quotes Rabbi Eliezer, and he holds Vadoim bevadoim muter, Vadoim besfeikon usfeikon bevadon usfeikon besfeikon also. So if you have a vadai apostle, somebody who no doubt is, shall we say, a mamzer, then he can marry a mamzeres. That's called Vadoim bevadoim, and that's mutalavo zebozeh. However, in 3 out of 4 other possibilities, he prohibits it. And apparently, he's coming to disagree with the previous Tana, and that is Rabbi Yehuda. What are the 3 out of 4 cases or scenarios in which Rabbi Eliezer prohibits the marriage? They're either going to be Vadon B'Sveikon. We can understand that. If you have a Vadai apostle, and the Suffolk apostle might be kosher, and he marries a Vadai apostle, that's not good. But now we have a case of Sveikon B'Sveikon. So let's say you have 2 people, both of whom have a Suffolk, and that would apply to the case of Shtuki, Asufi. This is a case of a child that was found abandoned, and you don't know what the status of the child is. So you and I would have said, and Rabbi Yehuda indeed would advocate in that favor, that Sveikos B'Sveikos should be mutter, because they both have the identical status. And just like a Vadai and a Vadai are allowed to marry each other, whether they're both Vadai Psulim or Vadai Ksherim, so to a suffix that has the status of a suffix or another suffix should be equal in status as far as Yuchsin. They should be allowed to marry Zeh B'Zeh. But although that is the shita advocated by Rabbi Yehuda, and we're going to see about Rabbi Yeshua as well, but nevertheless, Rabbi Eliezer, from his part, is arguing that a suffix is still a suffix, and one of the 2 might be Vadai Ksherim, not for us, but Klapi Shmaya, and the other might be a Vadai apostle, and we can't allow them to marry Zeh B'Zeh. So that would apply in the cases of Shtuki and Asufi. The sugi that we want to learn today on Daf Ayin Vav is going to analyze the status of a kusi, and we're going to try to analyze whether a kusi fits into the category, the status of a suffix, and it all depends upon how we understand the kusin. So we want to begin now on Daf Ayin Vav Amud Aleph, and we're going to start with the Yesh Omrim. So we're going to count down from the top of the Amud on Daf Ayin Vav, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines. And this is part of a brisa of Rabbi Eliezer that Kusim are not allowed to get married to the Jewish people. They can't enter the Kahal Yisrael. Lefisha ein bekim b'dikduke mitzvos. So what does this mean? Let's go a little bit weiter. Man yesh omrim. Who are these yesh omrim? Can we identify who the author of this shita is? Amar Rav Idi bar Avin, Rabbi Eliezer. This is Rabbi Eliezer. And Desanya, we're going to see from this brisa, which records a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel about the status of kusim and whether or not we can rely on their religious actions. For example, if they create matzah? Do they have lishma to make it into ushmartem es hamatzos? Tisanya, we learned in the Tosefta Masechet Psachim, matzah's kusi, a matzah that was baked by a kusi, muteres. Now, the word muteres here in this context means two things. Number one, it means that there's no chash chometz, because the kusim, as we'll soon see, are very careful about chometz. And number two, it means that we can eat that matzah l'shem matzah's mitzvah, and they have lishma. The Torah requires lishma in order for the matzah to qualify as ushmartem es hamatzos, for the achila of a matzah's mitzvah, which is a matzah's chova on the first night of Pesach. And kusim, according to the first shita here in the Brisa, are medagdek and vikiyim b'mitzvahs shmiras matzah, and they're capable of focusing their attention when they bake the matzahs on lishma l'shem mitzvah. However, Rabbi Eliezer is machnim, and he rejects the shita of the Tanakam, the oser, and he says that matzah's kusim is not permissible. You cannot eat it even during the rest of Pesach. Lefisha ein b'kiyim v'dikdukei mitzvahs. His understanding was that the kusim somehow drifted away, and we're going to study exactly how, from the traditional Judaism, and they fell out of certain mitzvahs, including shmira michimutz. And Rav Shimon Gamliel says, you know what? Let's analyze every single mitzvah unto itself and try to come up with an answer to the question whether kusim are careful about that mitzvah. Let's not make it a general statement. According to Tanakama, the general statement was that kusim are b'kiyim v'digduk mitzvahs. According to Rabbi Eliezer, they're not b'kiyim v'digduk mitzvahs. Says Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, let's come up with a compromise shita right down the middle, and that's going to mean that yesh mitzvah shechzik, yesh mitzvah shalachzik, called mitzvah shechzik ba kusim. If they were knowing to be Mekayim, the mutz is harbe medaktikim ba. Yosem Yisrael. Those mitzvahs that they, as we say in Yiddish, nemd on, they are even more meticulous about those mitzvahs than in Yisrael, and therefore will rely on their testimony. But Rabbi Eliezer holds, and he's the one who's brought down as Yesh Omrim, that ain't Bekiyim b'dikdukei mitzvahs. And that has to do with the fact that kusim are what's called psulei kol. So the Gemara raises the following question. We understand that if kusim are not b'kiyim b'mitzvahs, certainly we can't eat their matzah. They don't know how to watch the matzah from chimutz. There are many complicated laws about what constitutes chometz and what not. So, for example, just to mention one amongst many, if you take the wheat, the kernels of wheat, you soak it in water, then at some point it becomes chometz, and we can't use it for baking matzahs. And we're saying now that the matzah of kusim, since they are not b'kiyim b'dikdukei mitzvahs, they don't know how to protect and guard the isa from being chametz. Therefore, we're not allowed to eat their matzah, not even during the week. The halacha. But going back to the original position, Rabbi Eliezer formulated in the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Daled, as we saw earlier, that kusim are not allowed to enter into the Jewish folk My ein b'kiyim. What do you mean when you say ein b'kiyim? And now, because of their lack of care about a particular mitzvah, therefore they can't enter in, we can't marry them. A Jewish man cannot marry a female kusis, and a Jewish woman cannot marry a male kusi. And the Gemara answers, you know why Rabbi Eliezer insists that they can't come into the kol? And we'll see about one kusi marrying another kusis. Lefisha ein b'kiyim v'toras Kiddushin. So we have to worry about the fact that they were matir and Eishes ish, when the Kiddushin might have been valid, but might not have been valid. And they might say, you know what? Since there's a suffix about it, let's allow her to get married to someone else without receiving a get. Or perhaps a married woman received a get, but there's a suffix as to whether or not that get is valid. And they, the Kusim, may decide that, you know what, in a suffix situation, we can validate the get and allow it to marry someone else. Now, the child of that marriage is going to be a mamzer. How can we allow the children, which are mamzerim, children of the Kusim, to enter into the Jewish folk? After all, the Torah says that mamzer lo yova b'kal Hashem. So we have now, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the following picture. The Kusim cannot be trusted for chimutz as far as matzah, nor can we allow them to marry in because we can't trust them on Gittin v'Kiddushin. So now, Rav Nachman, Omer Bar Avua, he's going to give another reasoning. Mamzer, me'achoso, mamzer meishes ochnis arvu. The problem of Kusim is not the way we formulated until now, that they're not B'kiyim b'Torah, Gittin v'Kiddushin, but because of their understanding of the status of Achoso or Eishes Ach. And in their society, we have to worry about the possibility that a man had a relationship with his own sister or with the wife of his brother. We'll see about Yibum, but in situations where there is no Yibum. And the Gemara asks, my Kamashmal, what is Rav Nachman when he says that the mamzer comes from Achoso, and there's some mamzer me'achoso that got mixed up in the family of the Kusim? Why does he need to specify or focus his attention, our attention, on mamzer me'achosa? Why don't you say in the general sense, mamzer? Maybe there's a mamzer that got married into the family of the Kusim. And the Gemara answers the following, that Rav Nachman has a Kiddushin. Yesh mamzer michayve krisus. There is a shita that maintains in Masechet Gittin on Daf Mem Tes that a mamzer is only a result of a marriage relationship, which is a chiyuv misas bezdin. But if it's less than a chiyuv misas bezdin, it's only kares, there's no mamzeros. We have many, many different shitas in what kind of isur the child of which is a mamzer. So if Nachman's coming lafuki that shita, and he's saying no, even chayve krisus kidugmas achoso is enough to generate mamzeros. The Gemara is still not satisfied. V'nisnei chada. Why do you mention both achoso and Eishes Ach? It should have been enough to say, for example, mamzeres or mamzer me'achoso got mixed up in their lineage. And the Gemara says the following. If Rav Nachman was making his comment as an example of a mamzer that got mixed up, then you're right. It would have been sufficient for him to mention one case of a chayve krisus in which the child as a mamzer got married into the kusim. But there was a question that came up, an actual question, in which case there was evidence that mixed up in the kusim, there were these two mamzerim, one from a marriage relation between a man and his sister, and one from a marriage relation between a man and his brother's wife. So Rav Nachman was just reacting and formulating the halach in those two scenarios that actually came up. For Rava Omar, Rava has another explanation as to why kusim are excluded from Kahal Hashem, because Eved v'Shivcha nisar b'hem. An Eved married a daughter of the kusim, or a Shivcha was married off to one of the kusim. We don't know in which family, and therefore we cannot marry into their family. So the Gemara asks, Isura mishumai mishum Shivcha. You're telling me that the reason why we can't marry from the kusim is because of Shivcha that was married to one of them, and therefore the child of such a marriage would be an Eved. Nisnei Chada, once again, why not just choose to talk about Shivcha? Why do you talk about Eishes Ach and about Achoso? And where it says Ma'aseh Shoya Kachoya, according to Rava's tradition, Rav Nachman's response was to a situation in which they found out, they got privy to information that a Shivcha had married in to the families of the Kus. And this leads us to the Mishnah here in the middle of Daf Ayin Vav. Now the word Hanose at the beginning of this Mishnah needs a preface or a prefix, and that is a Kohen. And this is something that appears in the Mefarshei Mishnah, the Tosfos Yontif, and he claims that's the opinion of Rashi. The Pnei Yoshu explains that we're talking about a Chiyuv B'dika. That's going to be the subject of our daf today. And the Chiyuv B'dika, which means to check out the mothers of going back many generations, etc., before you get married, that is a Chiyuv D'Rabbanan. On a D'Oraisa level, even if you're afraid that maybe there's a mamzer, the Torah allows a Suffolk mamzer to get married into Kahal Hashem. And that's true for all the other psulim as well. However, when we establish that there is a Chiyuv B'dika, the Gemara is going to clarify on Daf Ayin Vav Amud Beis that that's because of what's called a Yotza Ir al Mishpacha. There was a rumor going around, circulating about this particular Mishpacha, that a mamzer got mixed up into the Mashpacha. And what we're going to say in such a case is that every individual has a cheskes kashrus. So we don't need a bedika. Why does the Mishnah establish a bedika? And this is called Ma'ala Asu B'Yuchsin Shel Kohanim. That with regard to Kohanim and their marriage, the Chazal made certain takanos that upgraded, shall we say, the standards of marriage for a Kohen. And one of those examples is Bedika. And that's what the Mishnah says, Hanose Isha Kohenes. So we're talking now about a Kohen who marries a Bas Kohen. And this Bas Kohen is Kshera L'Kuhuna, is Sarach Livdok Achrel. We have to check her Yuchsin for Doros before her, earlier Doros. For example, we're going to have to check out and see whether the child of this marriage could serve in the Mikdash on the Mizbeach as a Kohen. And if we certify and clarify that there are no psulim in the Doros Kodmin, which goes back 4 generations, as we'll see, Arba Mos, then the child of this marriage is Becheskas Kasha Lakuna. Now, when we're checking out for a psul, with regard to Kohanim, we have to check out, number one, to make sure there's no mamzerus, and number two, there are no other, what we call psule chitun, as Rashi points it out. Okay then, arba imos. So let's see. The Kohen, as we said before, wants to marry a Bas Kohen. He's going to do a bedika of 4 generations on the mother's side, Shem Shmona, because he's going to have to check out her father's side as well. For example, Ima v'em Ima. So he's checking out her mother and her mother's mother. V'em avi Ima, and the mother of her mother's father. V'ima, and the mother of the father of her mother. So we have Shtayin Shein Arba, 4 total bedikos of 4 generations on the mother's side. And the Mishnah goes on and says, hey, Shein Shmona, we're going to double it. Why are we going to double it? Because we're going to have to check out the father's side. Aim of Viha, that means the paternal grandmother, and Ima, the paternal great-grandmother. That's the Ima of the Aim of Via. And Aim of Via, going back another generation, V'ima, is now we have again Shtaim Shein Arba on the father's side. All told, 4 plus 4 is 8. But that's if a Kohen wants to marry a Kohen. And then we have the full Chiyuv B'dika Midrabanan, and we're not going to rely on Chezkas Kashrus. Now, when a Kohen marries a Kohenes, in a certain sense, he's one step forward, because this Kohenes has a Chezkas Kashrus. So we only need a B'dika of Shtaim Shein Arba times Shtaim Shein Arba, which means 8. But now the Mishnah says, what if a Kohen wants to marry a Levi or Yisrael? It's not a Kohen, a Bas Kohen. Now, amongst the other segments of Klal Yisrael, whether the Leviim or Yisrael, there was a lot more mixture of Psulei Chitun. Is therefore Mosifin Aleim Odachas. You've got to go back 1 additional generation. However, the Mishnah now goes on to tell you in which scenarios you don't need B'dika at all. Ein Bodkim means we don't require B'dika Lominam Mezbech Lamala if we know that, let's say, this girl's grandfather, our father's father. Again, we can't go through the mothers here because we're talking about, we're talking about Levi and Yisrael. So we find out that this Bas Leviah, her father and her father's father, served on the Mizbeach, which means that they were singing the songs of the Shiras HaLeviim. And that itself, the fact that we have testimony that they sang the songs in the Beis HaMikdash, that means that we knew about them, that they were miyuchasim, and therefore there's no more further need to be bodek them. V'lo min haduchen u'lamala. Well, just 1 second, I made a mistake. So again, lo min hamizbech u'lamala means what? I thought we were talking about a Leviah. Just 1 second. Oh, I got it. My mistake. I had this before, but I forgot to underline. That's my problem. So again, let's go back, retract one. Which means that during the Avodas HaMizbeach, her father's father participated. Now, what does that mean, participate? He can't do the Avodah, let's say, of Kabbalah Saddam, Holocha Saddam, Zrika Saddam al-Mizbeach. He's not a Kohen. But he did, let's say, Shchita. And Shchita is Ksher Bizah. However, they were makpid, even for a zar to be absolutely sure that he was a kosher and a miyuchas before they would allow him to shech the carbon. And now we have the case that I mentioned earlier, v'lo min haduchen l'mal. There's no need to do a bedika if the father of this girl was a participant in the Shiras HaLeviim. Because once again, we'll see that Sanhedrin was situated right outside the Beis HaMikdash. Because they would check out to make sure that anyone who participated in the Avodas HaMikdash was a meyuchas. So there's no longer a need to be boded. And also keep in mind, since we're talking about the father of the father, then we also have to add that we're not checking out the mother. Because once again, we assume that was already checked out in the earlier generations. If, let's say, our paternal grandfather served on the Sanhedrin as a dayan, and now we're talking, as Rashi points out later on in the sugya, about a dayan who sat on a bezdin shedanu dini nefashos, like a bezdin made up of 23 judges, and we know he's a miyuchas. They checked him out. V'chol shehuchzaku avosav mishotrei harabim. In any case where he served, meaning the father's father of this girl, served as a dayan in Dine Momenos, or the Gabai Tzedakah, he served as a Gabai Tzedakah to force a person to cough up money for Tzedakah, Masiyan L'Kahuna, the Ein Tzarech Livdoch Achreya. And the Gemara is going to analyze this and say that they were very careful about who would be a Gabai, because otherwise, if there was a Chashash Psul, nobody would pay attention to the Gabai. They would make fun of him. Rabbi Yossi Omer, I want to add another category of an individual, a grandfather who has already proven his kashrus, established, and therefore we don't have to worry about the granddaughter. Af misha yachosum eid bi'arki hayishana shel Tzipora. So there was a bezdin in the city of Tzipora, which was called Yeshana, and in that bezdin they were very makpid that no witnesses should testify unless we knew for a fact that we clarified that they were miyuchasim, that they had kosher yichus, and therefore, if we could determine that the father of this girl served as an aide in a bezdin called Yeshana in the city of Tzipori, then we don't have to be bodek. Rab Chanina ben Antignus Omer af mishaya muchtav biastratya. Now, the word astratya, which I believe is a Greek word, means battalions of soldiers. And what they used to do is every month they would have a rotation in the king's military arm, and they would replace last month's soldiers with a brand new, fresh group of soldiers. And those soldiers that were did a rotation every 30 days were called istratya, shalmela. And it's interesting that they had to be miyuchasim, and they wouldn't let them serve as chayalim in the king's battalion unless they had established their yichus. Now, the word astratya, Rashi points out, not here but elsewhere, is a davar chozer chalila midei tkufa. So it has a periodic rotation. Now, again, we have to understand why the Melech would care whether or not his soldiers are miyuchasim. And that's what the Gemara is going to address. First, though, the Gemara goes back to the case of a Kohen who marries a woman, and he's got to check out her yichus for 4 generations. Why doesn't the Mishnah go a step further and speak about a woman who wants to marry a Kohen? She's a Bas Kohen, and he should prove his lineage. Why is it that with regard to marrying a woman, we're going to check out her mother and the yichus? But when it comes to the male member, and he's a potential groom, we don't find any chiyuv b'dika for generations. And the Gemara answers the following. So let me give just a little bit of introduction to what the Gemara is about to reveal to us. The chash of psulei yuchsin, believe it or not, is a result of inner bickering, if I could use that word. When two families get into a fight about whatever, then one family starts revealing the yichus of the other family, the psulei yichus. So that's what the Gemara says, Nashi, when women get into these verbal altercations or confrontations, the chimitzu b'hadi adadi is, what do the women reveal about their, their counter, their, what word can we use there? Anti, Barayas hudaminsi. First of all, they start saying that, you know what? You come from a family of adulterers. And because women gossip a lot, this gossip eventually becomes public knowledge. And we begin to worry about psulei yichus. Isa dika milsa lo islei kola. However, the women are revealing something that we don't know publicly. The women speak behind the walls, in secret. Then it never really gets revealed until they start, battling with each other, confronting each other. Other than that, there's no call, meaning it's not public knowledge. So therefore, since, we may have heard accusations that were levied against a certain family that there are psulim mixed in, and even though it's not public knowledge, but we got wind of it, we have to worry about the possibility that there is really a psul. And in order to clarify that, we need to do bedika. But Gavri, when men start fighting with each other, and they have these kind of altercations, they start publicizing. It's not just a verbal fencing, whatever the word I'm looking for is, between two women, and the women say, "Oh, there was loose, immoral behavior in your family," or so on, which is all something that's less like color. But what the men do is they publicize psulei yichus when they have these confrontations. We didn't hear anything at all about this family that there's a psulei yichus. Had there been a chash of psulei yichus, we would have known about it. Why? Because it's public knowledge. So therefore, isa deika milsa, if in fact there is a psulei yichus in a certain individual or a community, a family, is like kol, we would have heard the call. So since we didn't hear the call, the silence, or shall I say the absence of a call, means that there was no chash psul. Because again, when they argue with each other, they would have certainly publicized the psul yichus. And if we didn't hear anything about it, it's, as I said before, it's like public knowledge. So the Gemara asks, wait a minute, the e nami tivdok beibedide. There's a bas Kohen, and she wants to marry a Kohen, and she wants to make sure he's a Kohen kosher. So she should l'chora be checking out 4 generations, 4 imos of her potential groom. Maybe there's a psul in the yichus. And again, I think we're going back to that principle that in kahuna there's a higher level of demanding and establishing kashrus. For example, in kahuna, we have what's called a psul chalolos, which is very specific and limited to kahuna. And there was sort of a laid-back attitude and a possibility that, you know what, she's marrying a chalol, he's marrying a chalola. So we need a special bedika because of the Mila of Kohanim, that even though we didn't hear anything to the contrary, we have to suspect it. And Messiah Leila Rav, that supports Rav Shilam Rav Yudim Rav. Lo huzaru ksheros linase lipsulim. A kohenes is not enjoined from marrying psule kahuna. So now the Gemara is going even one step further. The Gemara is saying that even if we would know about this man, this potential groom, that he is a chalal, the Torah is not going to prohibit a bas kohen from marrying a chalal. Whereas the other way around, if a kohen wants to marry a chalal, he's not allowed to do so. The Torah prohibited. So the Rabbanan are going to take a cue from the Torah law. If the Torah is not makbid on a bas kohen marrying a chalal, then the Chachamim are not going to require bedika. But here you have to keep in mind, we're making a leap of faith over here. We're not saying that, okay, you know what, there's only a problem of chalolus, we don't have to check that out, the Torah wasn't so makbid, and it allowed a bas kohen to marry a chalal. No, we're going a step further. We want to know whether or not we should check out a psul of kol. What do I mean by psul of kol? A psul of mamzer shtuki. So it means that once the Torah wasn't makbid as far as psule kahuna are concerned, and therefore we drop the requirement of bedika, then we don't even have to do a bedika for psule kol, for mamzer and shtuki. So I get the impression here from the footnote that not everybody agrees with what I told you. This is Rashi's Shita, but it could be that what the sugya here of Rav is exempting is from a bedika for kuhuna, but enochinami, there would be a need to check out psule kol. He quotes here in the footnote of Ramban that when it says Isha eino bodekes be'ish, she doesn't have to check him out. Zerak b'bdika mishum chalolos. V'lo huzaru ksheros linase l'psul. So even though she's a bas kohen ksher, she's allowed to marry a chol. Af b'bdika mishum chashash psule kol, af isha bodekes be'ish. So as far as mamzer and shtuki, the Ramban is of the opinion that even a woman marrying a man has to check out the man.
Wouldn't today we rely on a chesed kashrus? Obviously, like we don't do this obviously today.
Yeah, that's gonna come up in the Gemara itself. I'd rather wait until the Gemara deals with this.
Okay.
Rav Adabar Avatani, he had a brisa. Arba imo shehem shtemisre. Now, in our Mishnah, we had Arba imo shehem shmona. Now he's jacking it up to shtemisre, which means that we're going to have to be bodek in addition to the aim ha'em, right, the maternal grandmother. We have to be bodek even the aim ima, the maternal great grandma. And that's going to add another generation and a third generation upwards, and the total calculation will be shtemisre. Masnisa Tona, we have a price that goes even a step further than that. Arba imahos shein sheshesre. That means in addition to checking out the kashrus of the aim ha'em, we have to check out the aim ha'em, the great-great-grandmother. And now he's checking out 4 generations, and in each one there are 4 of the 4 imos. 4 times 4 is 16. I understand Rav Hadabar Av, who says that you have to check out 12 imos I can reconcile that with the Mishnah that only has 8 imos. And now we turn to Daf Ayin Vav Hamid Beis. Mukim La, he can understand this brisa. Bilevia Ubas Yisrael. That we have to add another generation and jack it up through the aim from 8 to 12. Elamasnisa. But what about the second opinion in the brisa of 16? Nema pliga. Do you hear the plane, or you don't even hear from you? All the planes going to Aza, I don't know all of them, but most of them go over my head. So whenever I hear the plane, I try to quote a pasuk. Nema pliga. Shall we assume that this price of 16 bedikos is against our Mishnah? The Gemara says no. There's no machlokas. But rather, the brisa is talking about Leviah and Yisraelis and maintains what does the Mishnah mean when it says Mosifin od achas in the case of Leviah and Yisraelis is od zug achas. It doesn't mean one, but it means a pair. So it's a pair of imos, and that checks it up from 12 to 16. Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Zo Divri Rabbi Meir, our Mishnah that requires 8 imos. So B'dik of 8 is Rabbi Meir. Aval Chachamim Omrim Kol HaMishpachos B'cheskes Kashrus Ein Omdos. This is what you were asking before, Ira. Why is it that B'zman Hazeh we don't find these B'dikos? And the answer is because Kol HaMishpachos B'cheskes Kashrus Ein Omdos, and we paskin like the Chachamim against Rabbi Meir. So everything that we learned is according to Rabbi Meir.
Right.
Now, if we're checking out both Chalolos, which is Psulei Kahuna, and Mamzerus, which is Psulei Kol, so the Gemara might be saying that according to Chachamim, we have to reject the requirement of Bedika for Psulei Kol. So we don't have to check out Mamzerus. But it could very well be that even the Chachamim Rabbi Meir would agree that when it comes to Kohanim, we have to upgrade the standard of Bedika, and we have to check out and make sure that there's no Psulei Chalolos, meaning Psulei Kahuna. I'm about to start but let's just add a little bit. Okay, I'm going to just have to use the button here. Okay. So the Gemara asks, how could Rabbi Yehuda say this in the name of Rav? We have a different statement in the name of Rav, and that is Eini va'amar Rav Chama bar Guri amar Rav. We have another tradition in the name of Rav, that Mishnah Seinu, our Mishnah that requires that we be bodek, the mishpach of a woman that you want to marry, is kshekori olav arar. When there are 2 witnesses that are already testifying that we heard a kol, that there's a psul in the mishpacha. The Rabbana can't reject that. And the Gemara answers, "Man masli ha lo masli ha." There's no stira here. Why? Because whoever learned in the name of Rav, that's Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav, that our Mishnah is only Rabbi Meir, and he requires a bedika of 4 generations. He never held that Rav would interpret our Mishnah in a case of Kara Olav Iru. But on the other hand, Rav Chama bar Guri, who had an alternative tradition, he holds that Rav interpreted our Mishnah in a case of Kara Olav Iru. And therefore, he holds that our Mishnah can square even with the Chachamim, because In a case of Iru, where two witnesses testify that there's a kol of psul, then for sure the chacham would require bedika to clarify that issue. So both shitas in the Amoraim, b'divrei Rav, can be reconciled. The shita of Yehuda and the shita of Chama. And we'll conclude with the next line in the Gemara. Ika diamri, Amar of Yehuda Marav, Zo, our Mishnah, that requires that in every mishpacha there should be a b'dika of 8 imos, is divrei Rabbi Meir. Aval chacham or mikol mishpachos b'chezkas ksheros eim omnos. Amar Rav Cham bar Grim Rav. Even though we said that every mishpacha has a chezkas kashrus, nevertheless in karal of irur tzarech livdog achareh. Then even the Rabbanan agree that we have to check out the arba imos and quiet down this kol that the Edom testify about, that there is a psul. So in other words, basically there's no machlokas here amongst the Amoraim about the das of Ram. Now, the next sugya, which we don't have time for today, unfortunately, is the sugya of when do we not require bedika? If, let's say, for example, we know that the great-grandfather was serving on the Mizbeach, or he was a Levi that did the Shira Sabeh, or in a case of a great-grandfather that served on the Sanhedrin, or even if the grandfather was a Gabite Stucker, they checked out the Gabite Stucker, and the Gemara is going to ask why. So that's what we're up to here. Ein bodkin min ha-mizbeach ulamal. Okay then?
Okay, shkoyach.
All right, Shkar, thanks so much.
Okay.